Welcome back, friends, to Backyard Bible Study. In our first segment, what we talked about was an introduction to how do we approach Bible study itself. And we talked about some of the conservative approaches as opposed to more classic mainline approaches, and where that might end us up, or lead us to, I should say. The dividing line, of course, between those was how we approach the biblical texts, those sacred texts, either literal or inspired. But what that does now, after having gone through that, is move us to a question of this particular book and its approach to scriptures, its approach to questions of scriptures. And Terence Fretheim is the author of this book. In a separate email or on our website, you can find this book available. It's for a few dollars, and you can get it on Amazon used, or you can spend a little bit more and get nicer versions of that too. So, most of those, if you want to order that, you're welcome to order that, and we'll be referring to this regularly. I did want to talk with you a bit about the book as we get into that. It's particularly in the preface or the beginning part of that book. So this is an introduction. This segment is an introduction to Fretheim's book. And as you saw from the cover, about the Bible, short answers to big questions. What he does is take a look in his table of contents about questions that we might have in the Bible. And the book itself is divided up. So if you wanted to take a closer look at the table of contents, you can stop your video and take a look at that further. And then I'll turn the page and go on to the next page as well. There you go. All right, let's move that over. Thank you very much, Wesley, our camera person, who's taking care of all of these things with his wonderful camera and equipment. Thank you, Wesley, in doing that. All right. So there you get a listing of all the questions. Now, what Fretheim's done in this particular book, it was so well received when it was put out about, I believe, 10 years ago or so, that it was so well received that there were 20 questions in that original edition of the book. And this book now is twice as long, has 35 questions, and these questions are frequently asked by people who go to church, don't go to church, those who are active in churches or have no interest whatsoever. But people in general have been made with a sense that they know that they're in a search for meaning and significance and purpose. And so they ask questions which really get at the essence of what is faith? Faith questions that are crossed with their real life experience and the wisdom of the ages that comes to us from the great thinkers and those who've been people of faith and those that we consider saints, which is a totally different understanding than what say Roman Catholics have, exceptional personalities and individuals. But we believe in this approach here that saints are those children of light, that we flicker all the time with flaws, but we still reflect that God's presence. And so those saints in our lives who have shown us that life is more than just the circumstances of the day. These questions are faith questions that really cross with the experience that we have, the real life experience that we have, the wisdom of the legacy of the ages. And it speaks to our quest to find meaning and significance and purpose beyond ourselves. All of us, well, perhaps not all, but most of us are interested at one time or another in that. And perhaps that's why we only have Sabbath once a week, because every day to dwell on that might be too much. It might be too much intensity. But to take a moment out on a regular basis, perhaps once a week, to have that Sabbath time of delving deeper beneath the circumstances, pulling back the covers of the days, and taking a look at what is there underneath the surface, peering beneath the surface of the waves of things that come to us. This particular book, twice as long as the original, really talks about the fact that concrete answers to questions in the Bible are often difficult to come by. In fact, when you go to church and you explore your faith, it's often a ministry of questions as a whole. And you move from simplistic questions, what's for dinner, to much deeper questions when you get to your faith life, your spiritual life. What's my life for? How should I be a parent? How do I put food and other things on the table and clothes in the closet and take care of life itself, while at the same time being true to what my values are? How do I earn a living? Where do I pay for products that may not be taking advantage of other people? These kinds of questions are important, and they may not always provide, the Bible may not always provide us with answers. The Psalms, for example, raises questions all the time, and the Psalms particularly speaks to the times of suffering and death. Much of what I'm going to be sharing with you comes directly from Fretheim's pages, and I'm simply lifting that up and inviting us to consider those things. God's people, as Fretheim says, are often stuck between promise and fulfillment. There are two ways in which we raise our questions often in Scripture. One, the community raises its voice, and second, the prophet raises these questions on behalf of the people. In the face of all kinds of questions that come to us, frequently we in the church are often doing a disservice to people by not addressing those questions head on, because we often have a conflict-averse approach. We don't want to challenge ideas and perspectives that may be there. We don't want to challenge or really put in front of people answers that might, or conversation that might make people feel uncomfortable. And so we might bury the questions. We might shy away from the questions. But so often, that's precisely what people want. Missionaries, when they went out to every culture, knew that people needed to be fed first. Sound familiar? Like what Jesus did with the feeding of the 5,000. Feed them first. And then when their stomachs are full and when those questions of where do I get my next meal are taken care of, then their mind and their heart open to what's really important in their thinking of the day. In our own culture today, more of the common problem might be about mental and emotional, intellectual needs that need to be addressed before we can get to those deeper things. And so we want to take care of those. Psalm 77 calls us to remember and to meditate on, to ponder everything that God has done, and to bring our questions. And that's where we begin. Fretheim's preface, or his introduction, tells us that God has loved us enough not to leave us unchallenged, not to leave us nicely settled with what we now hold dear. But God has cared for us deeply enough to catch us up in a whirlwind of conversation, with questions flying back and forth and all around, leading us to that day when we stand face to face before God. And we might show up on that day of eternal mourning with these words in our lips. God, I've got a question. What was? And then you can answer that. You can bring that forward yourself. The 35 questions in this book will lead us on a journey in that way. Come and join in that conversation. Until next time.